The Soul Society thought Ichigo Kurosaki was their ultimate weapon, but what if their greatest savior became their executioner? What could make the hero who protected Soul Society time and time again return as its enemy? Everything changes during the first Quincy invasion. Ichigo has just escaped Quilga Opie's jail. The Soul Society is in ruins. Yamamoto is dead, and Yhwach has already shattered Tensa Zangetsu. From Ichigo's perspective, the battle is already over. In the original timeline, Yhwach leaves when his time in the Soul Society runs out, but in this one, he decides to stay for a moment longer. And instead of leaving quietly, he tells Ichigo the truth. Not part of it, all of it. Masaki was a Quincy, which means Ichigo carries Quincy blood as well. And according to Yhwach, the Soul Society hid that truth from him his entire life. Then he offers Ichigo a choice. Come to the Vondenreich, learn the truth about his mother, and the remaining Soul Reapers will be spared. Refuse, and the Sternritter will wipe out whoever is left before Yhwach returns to the Shadow Realm. Exhausted and confused, Ichigo is surrounded by the broken bodies of his friends. Even Byakuya is barely alive in the snow, and when Ichigo sees him, he hesitates. And after a long silence, he takes Yhwach's hand. Back in the Soul Society, panic spreads almost immediately. With Yamamoto gone, and their greatest hope willingly walking away with the enemy, morale collapses overnight. Meanwhile, in the world of the living, Ishida hears the news. In the original story, he joins the Vondenreich later as part of his own plan against Yhwach. But now, everything changes for him too, because this is no longer just about stopping Yhwach, it's about saving his best friend. Inside the Silburn, Yhwach starts working on Ichigo immediately, but granting Ichigo a shrift isn't that simple. Hollow powers are poison to Quincy's. If Yhwach tried the normal method, the interaction between his soul piece and Ichigo's inner hollow would create serious problems almost immediately. So instead, he takes a different approach. Using Masaki's bloodline, he performs an ancient Quincy ritual. Its purpose is simple: awaken Ichigo's dormant Quincy abilities, while sealing away his hollow and Shinigami powers behind layers of reishi. The process works, but not perfectly. Tiny cracks remain in the seal from the very beginning. At first, nobody notices, but over time, traces of hollow energy begin leaking through. And without realizing it, Ichigo slowly starts destroying himself from the inside. Not even Yhwach knows it yet. Soon after, the entire Vondenreich receives shocking news. Ichigo Kurosaki has been named Yhwach's successor, the Quincy Prince. Needless to say, not everyone is happy about it. Many Sternritter have served Yhwach for centuries. Then a former enemy arrives and is handed a position above all of them. Basby is furious, and several others quietly share the same resentment. Only Yhwach remains completely loyal to Yhwach's decision. With his Bankai destroyed and his Shinigami power sealed away, Ichigo begins learning the ways of the Quincy. From Blut Veni to Hirankyaku to Heilig File, he learns the entire Quincy arsenal. Without a Zanpakuto, he eventually abandons sword combat altogether, and using the remains of his broken Bankai, he creates a massive black longbow, unlike anything seen before. Its arrows carry the same overwhelming force his Getsuga Tensho once did. Only now, that power belongs to the Quincy Prince. And while Ichigo adapts to his new life, someone else begins preparing to enter the Vondenreich. Ishida. Unlike everyone else, he refuses to believe Ichigo has truly switched sides. After everything they've been through together, he knows something is wrong. Still, he understands one thing. If Ichigo really chose Yhwach willingly, he may eventually be forced to fight him. Determined to learn the truth, Ishida accelerates his own plans and enters the Vondenreich far earlier than he does in canon. Yhwach welcomes him with open arms. After all, Ishida is still the last surviving Quincy chosen by the Almighty. To everyone watching, it looks like Yhwach has gained two successors instead of one. But unlike Ichigo, Ishida is only pretending. His true goal never changes. Destroy Yhwach from within. As time passes, Ichigo gradually settles into his role as the Quincy Prince. He fights beside the Sternritter, studies Quincy history, and slowly starts questioning everything he once believed. The entire time, Yhwach carefully controls the information he receives. He tells Ichigo about centuries of persecution, about the destruction of the Quincy, and he paints the Soul Society as villains who manipulated him his entire life. Because Ichigo doesn't know the full story yet, some of those words begin taking root, whether he wants them to or not. Little by little, his view of the Soul Society begins to change. For the first time in his life, Ichigo feels disconnected from both worlds. He's no longer fully a Soul Reaper, but he doesn't truly belong among the Quincy either, and that loneliness slowly begins eating away at him. Meanwhile, Yhwach makes another important move. Just like in canon, he descends into Muken to recruit Aizen. Naturally, Aizen has no intention of serving anyone. But when Yhwach arrives with Ichigo standing beside him, something unexpected happens. Aizen becomes interested. After all, Ichigo has always been the centerpiece of his experiments, and seeing him transformed into Yhwach's prince irritates him more than he would ever admit out loud. While speaking with Ichigo, Aizen notices something immediately. The seal suppressing his hollow powers is unstable, and tiny cracks are already beginning to form. Aizen says very little, just a few carefully chosen words, a couple of questions, a little doubt. Small seeds planted deep inside Ichigo's mind, but he never openly opposes Yhwach. He simply waits, because if there's one thing he understands better than anyone, it's patience. Back in the world of the living, Isshin Kurosaki is falling apart. Unlike everyone else, he knows the truth about Masaki. Yhwach used Oswalin years ago. Masaki lost her Quincy powers because of it, and he knows that without that event, Grand Fisher never would have killed her. In other words, Yhwach is directly responsible for Masaki's death. If Ichigo learned that truth right now, everything Yhwach has built would collapse instantly, and that's exactly why Yhwach keeps him isolated. No visits, no communication, and no chance for his father to reach him. As the weeks pass, another problem starts appearing. Every time Ichigo uses his Quincy powers, traces of hollow energy leak through the damaged seal. At first, it's barely noticeable, but eventually, even Hashwalth starts noticing brief moments where Ichigo's spiritual pressure becomes unstable. Strange black markings flicker across his body, then vanish just as quickly. Yhwach dismisses it outright. He believes his control is absolute, but Aizen knows better. And somewhere deep inside Ichigo's soul, White keeps pushing against its cage, waiting, growing stronger, preparing for the day the prison finally breaks. Eventually, the time for the second invasion arrives, but things don't unfold the same way they did in canon. Without Ichigo traveling to the royal palace and receiving the special clothes created by the Zero Squad, Yhwach loses one of his biggest advantages. In the original timeline, Ichigo's Oken clothing allowed Yhwach to break through the barriers protecting the Soul King. In this world, those barriers remain completely intact, so Yhwach is forced to adapt, combining his own power with the immense spiritual pressure of the Quincy Prince. Using Sanct Altar and Ichigo's Reiatsu, he slowly tears open a path toward the royal palace. The process is far slower and far less efficient than it should be. For the Soul Society, that extra time becomes priceless. Shunsui immediately begins organizing defenses, Mayuri starts preparing countermeasures, and Ichibei begins considering something far more terrifying: his backup plan. Long before the war began, Ichibei had already accepted something. If the Soul King ever died, someone would need to replace him. Originally, Ichigo was his ideal candidate, but now Ichigo fights for Yhwach, and to Ichibei that makes him an existential threat. Without hesitation, he begins searching for another replacement, and among the surviving captains, one name stands above the rest: Kenpachi. Of course, he has absolutely no interest in becoming some cosmic linchpin, but that doesn't stop Ichibei from trying anyway. At the same time, Urahara reaches his own conclusion. Unlike everyone else, Kisuke understands just how unstable Ichigo's existence truly is. Shinigami, Quincy, and Hollow. Three completely different powers somehow existing within a single soul. Normally, those powers balance each other out, but Yhwach's seal has disrupted that balance completely, and if the pressure keeps building, Ichigo might eventually destroy himself. Or worse, he could become something nobody can stop. So Urahara develops a dangerous device, not a weapon meant to kill Ichigo, a weapon meant to save him. His plan is simple: force the hollow side to break free violently enough to shatter Yhwach's influence. It's an enormous gamble, but Urahara knows there are no safe options left. But something important happens right after this. Quick shout out to Jane for supporting the channel. If you want to be next, comment, "I subbed." Now watch this. The Quincy Prince finally descends onto the battlefield, and the sight alone devastates everyone watching. Ichigo no longer wears black robes. Instead, he stands beside the Stern Ritter wearing white, his enormous black bow radiating overwhelming spiritual pressure. For a moment, nobody moves. Nobody wants to believe what they're seeing. Then, the battle begins. Captain after captain throws themselves into the fighting, but Ichigo's stronger than ever. Blut Veini protects him from attacks. Blut Artery amplifies his offense, and his Heilig File destroy entire sections of the battlefield. Even seasoned captains struggle to keep up. Eventually, Kenpachi steps forward, and unlike everyone else, he's smiling, because to him, this is perfect. At last, he gets to fight Ichigo without either of them holding back. Their clash shakes the battlefield, and for the first time in years, Kenpachi feels genuinely excited. At the same time, Renji and Rukia confront their former friend. Neither of them truly wants to fight him, especially Rukia. She remembers the boy who rescued her from execution, the boy who changed her life. So instead of aiming to kill, she fights only to restrain him, using Haka no Togame in an attempt to freeze him long enough to reach whatever remains of the real Ichigo. But nothing works. Or at least, that's what everyone thinks. Because at that exact moment, Urahara activates his device, and everything changes. The damaged seal surrounding Ichigo's hollow powers finally gives way. A terrifying explosion of spiritual pressure erupts across the battlefield, black and white energy colliding violently as the sky itself starts shaking. Even the Stern Ritter are forced to retreat. And for the first time since joining Yhwach, Ichigo screams, not in anger, not in rage, but in pain, because deep inside his soul, White has finally broken free. As the battlefield descends into chaos, two people finally make their move. Isshin Kurosaki and Ishida. Working together, they force their way into enemy territory, while everyone else is distracted by the disaster unfolding around Prince Ichigo. By now, Ichigo's condition has become completely unstable. The damaged seal is breaking apart. White is rampaging inside him, and Aizen's words have already planted doubt that refuses to disappear. When Isshin finally reaches his son, he doesn't waste time. He tells him everything. Not half-truths, not excuses, the actual truth. Yhwach used Ausweilen years ago. Masaki lost her Quincy powers because of it. Without that event, Grand Fisher never would have killed her. Yhwach didn't simply allow Masaki to die, he caused her death. For a moment, everything stops. The memories, the lies, the guilt, and the confusion. It all crashes down on Ichigo at once. And that's the moment Yhwach's control finally begins collapsing. But there's still one problem, the Almighty. Even if Ichigo regains his senses, Yhwach can see countless futures ahead of time, and any attempt at betrayal would be stopped before it even happened. That's what makes defeating him nearly impossible, which is why the answer was never Ichigo, it was always Ishida. Throughout the entire war, Ishida had been waiting for the right moment, and now that moment finally arrives. As Yhwach prepares to reach the Soul King, Ishida activates Antithesis. Instead of creating a new future, Antithesis reverses events that have already happened, something even the Almighty struggles to account for. In an instant, the damage done to Ichigo's mind is undone. For the first time since accepting Yhwach's offer, Ichigo is finally himself again, and the realization nearly destroys him. He remembers everything, every battle, every person he hurt, every choice he made, but before he can fall apart completely, his friends stand beside him, because that's what they've always done. Yhwach finally understands what's happening, and for the first time in centuries, he becomes angry. The battle that follows is unlike anything the world has ever seen. Ichigo and Ishida fight side by side, not as Quincy and Soul Reaper, not as rivals, but as brothers. Even weakened, he remains overwhelming, and the Almighty keeps twisting reality itself again and again, with victory slipping away every time it feels close, until one final piece enters the battlefield. Ryukin Ishida, using the silver formed from the victims of Ausweilen, he delivers the still silver arrow, the one weakness Yhwach never expected. For a single second, the Almighty stops, and 1 second is all they need. Ichigo releases everything he has left, not as the Quincy Prince, not as Yhwach's successor, but as Ichigo Kurosaki, the boy who always protected others, the young man who challenged fate itself, and with Ishida beside him, Yhwach is finally defeated. But victory comes at a cost. Months of suppressing his powers have left permanent scars, and the damaged balance between Hollow, Quincy, and Soul Reaper energies continues tearing his body apart even after the war ends. Recovery is slow. Urahara eventually stabilizes his condition, but some wounds never fully heal, and the hardest part isn't even physical, it's emotional, because Ichigo remembers everything he did while serving Yhwach, and even knowing he was manipulated, the guilt never completely disappears. Fortunately, he isn't alone. Orihime remains beside him. Rukia and Renji never abandon him. His father helps him carry the pain. And Ishida, the friend who refused to give up on him, stays at his side until the very end. Years later, peace finally returns. But people still remember the brief period when the Soul Society's greatest hero became its greatest enemy. As for Ichigo himself, one question continues haunting him. Could he ever forgive himself? Honestly, maybe not completely. But perhaps forgiveness isn't what matters most. Maybe what truly matters is that when darkness consumed him, the people he loved never stopped reaching out their hands, and in the end, that was enough to bring him home. But what do you think? Would Ichigo ever forgive himself? Let me know below. Click the next what if. Trust me, that one changes everything.